Hi, I'm Cindy McGee, and you're watching Polymer Clay TV. Today's project is inspired by this fabric that I found on a skirt in an online store. The background for these pieces is going to be the new Primo Sculpey turquoise granite. Sculpey just sent me this sample product and it's awesome. I love the granite effect and I think it's going to be perfect for the background for this design. Oh, there's nothing like fresh clay. It's just soft enough that it's workable and it just makes me happy. I'm going to make individual pieces this time instead of doing a veneer because I want to save some of this precious clay for another project. So I'm just going to use half of the package for this. So I have rolled it out to a setting 2 on my clay machine. I'm going to start with the largest cutter from the Tribal Shells collection from CreateAlong and cut the first piece, and then from the second piece that I've got rolled out, I'm going to use the largest cutter from the Wide Diamond Marquise collection at CreateAlong, and then I'm going to roll up the scraps and roll it out and cut just a round piece too. To make the tree branches, I'm using some Primo Sculpey burnt umber and some raw sienna, which I have just cut into little slices. I'm going to make a little stack with them, alternating the colors, and then compress and roll the stack into a cylinder that will fit inside of my extruder. That in my extruder, and I'm using a small hole disc, and I'm going to extrude the strands, and this way we'll have touches of both of those shades of brown in the extruded strands. I started by placing a strand about 2/3 of the way down. Now you can determine the placement of your branches by using this bird cutter. These are from CreateAlong too, and this is what I'm using to make the birds. So I've kind of decided where I was going to put the birds and then placed my branches accordingly. Place your strands down. Yeah, that'll work, okay. And then I'm using a sculpting tool to press down on them further so that I don't make fingerprints. I want to flatten it a bit. And I'm using the edge of my tool to make just some little random lines here and there to give it a little bit of texture. And then I'm going to make some smaller strands, just roll extrusion until it's a little thinner so that your branches off of that main branch have a little variation in sizes. I did 2 branches on each of these pieces, one facing in one direction and then the second facing in the opposite direction. So just keep adding these little sections until you're happy with the overall coverage. So here are my branches. Now I want to give them a little beige highlighting like they are in that original pattern on the fabric. And to do that, I'm using some pan pastel, and this is yellow oxide tint. You can use any light shade that's got kind of a beige or a tan effect. And I'm just going to use my fingertip very, very lightly, add a touch of it over the surface to highlight the texture. You don't want to block out the color, the browns, you just want to add some highlighting. Next, I conditioned and rolled out some pomegranate red Primo to a setting 5 on the clay machine. I'm using a small heart cutter to cut out the largest of the buds. If you don't have one of these, you could use like the center part of this heart cutter, or you can freehand cut all of them, but I cut some of these hearts. And then I came back with my craft knife and cut more hearts in progressively smaller sizes. It's okay if they're not perfect. I want them sort of irregular. To turn those hearts into more of a flower buds, more similar to the fabric, I'm using my craft knife to make a slice down the center, and then I'm using my sculpting tool to just very gently separate the two halves of the heart and thin them out a little bit, and just bend them until you're happy with the shape so that it's more of a narrow heart or a bud shape. Again, I'm going to give those a bit of coloration with some pan pastel, and this is permanent red tint. You can use any pale red or pale pink shade. And I'm using my fingertip to apply it just here and there on some of the hearts. Now it's time to start adding those little flower bud hearts to the branches. Now I use the same cutter to make sure that I'm not going to put flowers where I don't need them, where the bird's going to cover them. So I will keep referring back and picking up that cutter and placing it where I'm going to have it so that I can determine the arrangement for the flowers themselves. For each of my 3 pieces, I'm going to make a bird, and the birds are going to be different, and they're all designed to mimic the birds in the fabric. I'm using Primo Cadmium Red Hue clay that I've rolled to a 3 on my clay machine, and I'm just going to place a little plastic wrap over it and then cut 3 of the birds with the bird cutter. For the first bird, it has a black and white wing. So I'm using just a piece of black clay, as you can see, and I've run some white clay through to a very, very thin setting. I think this is like an 8 or a 9 even. And I'm tearing off pieces, and I'm going to make some little stripes. You want to make 2 of them and place them pretty close together on that black background. It's okay if it's in chunks. And then roll this piece through your clay machine so that the white stripes are horizontal. You don't want them vertical when you run it through. You want them horizontal, so up and down. Roll it through. It through a couple of times, and I think I ended up on like an 8 on my clay machine. and then there is going to be our wing. So use that same bird cutter to cut out the section that's going to be the wing, and then you can use your craft knife to trim around it before placing it onto the red bird. I love how it really sort of mimics the feathers on the original fabric, the pattern of the feathers on the wing. I used my sculpting tool to smooth the edges down a bit and add a little bit of texture to that wing. This bird also has a black beak, so I'm going to use just a scrap and my cutter to cut out a piece for the beak. And I find it easier to use a circle cutter when I'm doing this, just to cut the back side of the beak. And then I'm going to place it on the bird. The last thing our little bird needs is an eye, and you want just a very, very, very tiny, an eensy-weensy ball of white that you're going to place where you want the eye on the head and press it down a little bit, and then add a tiny little speck of black to that. And then this bird will be finished. Use your blade to lift up your bird, and you can make any adjustments you need here and there where the red may be showing, or clean up any edges you need to. Now the next bird, again patterned from the original fabric, has a great amount of blue and black on it. The wing area is almost all blue. So I did the same technique, but I used some regular turquoise primo. And then I'm going to cut the wing from that. This bird in the original fabric has a black head, so I have used the scrap black sheet, and again the same cutter, to cut out a head section. And I'm just going to use my craft knife and trim around it a little bit before I place it over the red. Now I'm going to come back and use my cutter to cut the wing a little more precisely, and then add the wing to the bird. Again, using my sculpting tool to smooth the edges and to add some texture and give it a feathery type effect. And then lastly, we need to add an eye to this bird in the same way that we added an eye to the first bird. The third bird that I'm going to mimic from the fabric has a bit of a woodpecker kind of feel to it. So I have rolled some black. Again, this is, I believe, an 8 on my clay machine, and I'm going to cut out a blackbird and set that aside for now. And the head of this bird is sort of a ecru off-white color. This is just some scrap I had, so I'm going to use my bird cutter to cut the head and then trim it as I need to and place it on the bird. Next, I took my craft knife and trimmed out the wing area, and I'm leaving the tail on for this one because the bird in the fabric has a black tail. Place the wing in place and use your sculpting tool to smooth the edges and sort of blend some of that black up into the beige over the head. This bird has sort of a dark orange beak, so I'm using some scrap. I think this is sweet potato, but it's just a dark orange. And again, the same cutter. I cut the beak, and I'm placing it onto the beak on the original bird. And then I'm going to add a tiny little black eye to this one. Now, if you look at the reference fabric, again, this bird has a longer profile. It has a much more narrow neck and almost a longer neck effect. So I'm very carefully going to compress the neck area of my bird and push it upwards and elongate it a bit to give it more of that woodpecker type shape like it is in the original fabric. And it also has a longer, more pointed beak. So again, I've taken my fingers and just gently compressed the beak to give it more of a woodpecker's type beak. So now your 3 birds are ready to add to your 3 background pendant pieces. And now they're ready to go into the oven and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions. Here they are after baking. Now I just need to finish the jewelry pieces. I'd love to have your input on what you would do to finish these pieces. A black background? A gold background? What color satin cording would you use to suspend the pendants? Share your ideas on our Polymer Clay Tribe Facebook group. For more inspiration, join our Polymer Clay Tribe Facebook page. Over 18,000 members sharing projects every day. For lots more creative polymer clay ideas, visit the Polymer Clay TV blog.